Okay, well, let's get to our commentary segments. I'm in the hot seat. I'll start off. And I feel like maybe I'm beating a dead horse with this topic because I keep talking about it, but I care about it a lot because I care about the importance of journalism, which of course is not being carried out appropriately in the United States, and there are consequences to that. So, seems like very few people find it reasonable to critique Bob Woodward's decision to sit on critical audio recordings of Donald Trump admitting that he was intentionally downplaying coronavirus as early as February 7th of this year. Now, I want you guys all to just take a moment and think about where your head was when it came to coronavirus in February. Even by late February, did you take the virus seriously? Was it on your radar? Were you engaged in behaviors that were risky or dangerous as this virus was quickly spreading here in the United States? And the truth is, most people, myself included, didn't really know if COVID-19 was real. Is this another like SARS epidemic? Is this really something that's going to impact me? Is this, and I got to be honest, is this something that maybe the Democratic Party is trying to amplify as a way to hurt Donald Trump? I literally asked that question to one of my colleagues in February, right? So there are a lot of reasonable people who would take a pandemic seriously, who were in the dark about coronavirus because Donald Trump wasn't talking about it publicly and Bob Woodward was sitting on incredibly important audio that might have led to people doing what it took to prevent the spread of this virus early on. Now, if you haven't heard what I'm talking about, Bob Woodward is coming out with a book very, very soon. To promote the book, he released some of these audio recordings from the 18 conversations he had with Donald Trump. Here's one of the audio recordings, which took place on February 7th of this year.
And so what was President Xi saying yesterday?
Well, we were talking mostly about the virus, and I think he's going to have it in good shape. But it's a very tricky situation.
Indeed,
it goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. The touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. People don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know. It's
pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that
the
same thing?
This
is more deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff.
That was February 7th, where Donald Trump acknowledged that this is an airborne virus, and he acknowledged that it's more deadly than the flu, okay? Did the majority of Americans know that in February? No, they didn't, okay. So while Trump absolutely understood the severity of this virus, he intentionally spread misinformation, and Bob Woodward knew the truth all along, didn't release these audio recordings until he was about ready to promote his book, which I find absolutely unacceptable. And for the Democratic voters who come at me and accuse me of being pro-Trump because I have a problem with the lack of ethical behavior by someone who's supposed to be a legendary journalist, just understand that this country isn't just about the 35% of Trump voters, people who will stand by Trump no matter what. It's also about the rest of Americans who do respond to actual evidence, who do respond to medical experts, and would have changed their behavior had they known early on that this was a serious virus. But corporate Democrats have latched on to any scandal that might make Donald Trump look bad because they understand that their party, with Joe Biden running in the general election, has absolutely nothing to offer. No ambitious policy proposals, no promises of systemic change, only, hey, guess what? Joe Biden has a little bit of empathy, and also look at how terrible Donald Trump is. I think that that is an insanely terrible campaign strategy, and I think that it has failed in the past, but more importantly, it's excusing the fact that Bob Woodward held on to this audio as nearly 200,000 Americans died from this virus, and he waited until he was ready to promote his book. That is unethical, to say the least, and I'm not going to buy any of the arguments protecting him, including the ridiculous argument that Bob Woodward isn't a daily reporter. He really likes to report on the big picture. I don't care what Bob Woodward's job is. I don't care what format he prefers. If he puts himself in the position of a journalist, he needs to think of it as a public service. But under this capitalistic model, he understood that it was more important to sell books by putting this audio out just a few weeks or a week before his book was going to come out, to promote it. Now, it took 7 months for us to hear that audio from February 7th. 7 months, nearly 200,000 American deaths. And, on the exact same day that Trump had that conversation with Woodward, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo actually bragged on Twitter about sending critical medical supplies to China. We have coordinated with U.S. organizations to transport more humanitarian relief to people in Wuhan. Personal protective equipment and other medical supplies donated by these organizations can help save lives in China and help protect people from the coronavirus. Well, that's just great. And as we all know, our hospitals ran out of PPE just as the pandemic and the virus was really starting to spread here in the United States. It was a complete disaster. After that, on February 10th, 26th, and 27th, Trump continued to publicly downplay the virus by calling it something that was easy to get rid of, something that would just go away. Let's take a look.
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true. But we're doing great in our country. China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very, very hard. And I think it's going to all work out fine. And again, when you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done. It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
Yes.
Oh, I'm not done yet. Again, the conversation with Woodward happened on February 7th. Then on March 4th, nearly a month after Trump first acknowledged the severity of the insanely contagious nature of COVID-19, he held a press conference telling Americans that it's safe to fly on commercial airlines.
What is your message to Americans that it's safe to fly, and can you convince the traveling public?
I think where these people are flying, it's safe to fly, and large portions of the world are very safe to fly. So we don't want to say anything other than that. And we have closed down certain sections of the world, frankly, and they've sort of automatically closed them also. They'll understand that, and they understand it better, perhaps, than anybody. Yes, it's safe.
Okay, so that was on March 4th, nearly a month after Trump had talked to Woodward, nearly a month after Trump had explained to Woodward that this was a highly contagious virus, airborne, and more lethal than the common flu. So did Woodward say anything about it then? Did he release the audio then? Of course not. Who cares? Why would he? You got to hold on to it so you can promote your book. On March 9th, when the United States had nearly 1,000 confirmed cases of the virus, Trump compared it to the common flu, okay? As we know from that February 7th audio recording, he had said that it's more deadly than the common flu, but he tweeted this. So last year, 37,000 Americans died from the common flu. It averages between 27,000 and 70,000 per year. Nothing is shut down. Life and the economy go on. At this moment, there are 546 confirmed cases of coronavirus with 22 deaths. Think about that. So he's essentially comparing it to the common flu and saying, this is no big deal. So did Woodward release any audio after that tweet? Of course he didn't. He just held on to it. It would take weeks for Trump to finally admit that coronavirus is not comparable to the common flu. He publicly admitted as much on March 31st. But before Trump fessed up publicly, he had another frank conversation with Bob Woodward about the severity of the virus 12 days earlier. 12 days earlier. So let's listen to that.
Now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob. Just today and yesterday, some startling facts came out. It's not just older.
Yeah, exactly.
Young people, to plenty of young people.
So
what's going on
give me a moment of talking to somebody, going through this with Fauci or somebody who kind of, it caused a pivot in your mind? Because it's clear just from what's on the public record that you went through a pivot on this to, oh my God, the gravity is almost inexplicable and unexplainable.
Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
Sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
We didn't hear that audio until a few days ago. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you consider all of the Americans who got sick. More than 6 million Americans had confirmed cases of coronavirus. As I mentioned, nearly 200,000 deaths. But Woodward was silent until he was ready to promote his book. And I'm going to keep repeating that because that's really the heart of the issue here. Now, only 5 days after he had that conversation with Woodward on March 19th, Trump actually decided to announce that he wanted to reopen the country by Easter. Let's watch.
You said that we would, I'm paraphrasing now, you would like to be back to normal by Easter Sunday.
Yes.
That's 19 days from now.
It's okay.
Is that true? Is that possible? Or is that false?
I think it's possible. Why isn't it? I mean, we've never closed the country before, and we've had some pretty bad flus, and we've had some pretty bad viruses, and I think it's absolutely possible.
So at that point, maybe it's a good time for Woodward to come out and say, it's a terrible idea to open by April 12th. Maybe we shouldn't do that, especially because I have this audio with Trump admitting that this is severe. This is a severe situation, a very serious virus, and we shouldn't risk the lives of Americans by opening early. Now, do I think that Trump supporters would respond well to that audio? Would it be persuasive enough for them? No, probably not. But again, it's not just about persuading Trump supporters. It's about giving average Americans, people who are responsive to logic and to evidence, the opportunity to do what it takes to keep themselves safe. Period. You got to keep in mind, during this time, Donald Trump not only was pressuring states to reopen their economies, he was also refusing to tell people to wear masks. Months after he had admitted that this is an airborne virus, he refused to wear his mask himself. He held a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Trump, along with countless other members of the GOP, pressured the states to not only open prematurely, but also to open their schools and to just completely ignore the guidelines put out by his own Centers for Disease Control. And it's just, obviously, there are going to be people who are desperate. There are people who want to get back to work. There are people who are sick of having to homeschool their kids. They want to send their kids back to school. So to hear someone like Donald Trump repeat over and over again that everything is fine, constantly downplaying this virus, even some reasonable people might be tempted to buy into that argument and give into him greenlighting opening schools or opening businesses, right? And so Americans have suffered the consequences of Trump's lies. I want to give you exact numbers, and at this point, they're probably updated to be even higher. But as of September 10th, 2020, the Centers for Disease Control found that 6,381,013 total cases of coronavirus, 191,353 deaths of coronavirus. And just in the last 7 days, 248,939 new cases of coronavirus. And so, look, as David Dayen writes in the American Prospect, I think this is just a perfect way of kind of summarizing the issue here. Bob Woodward sitting on information about presidential lies until he has a book to promote is, well, it's the difference between being a hungry reporter in 1973 and a palace courtier in 2020. Many people were going to die from minimizing the extent of the pandemic and not acting on knowledge of its impact. An author with as big a financial cushion as Woodward would recognize that and act in the interest of humanity rather than his first printing. And I absolutely agree with him. Again, if you only want to focus on hurting Trump in the upcoming election, you think that what Woodward did was great because you're under this myth that Trump supporters are going to walk away from him if they hear this type of audio. They're not. This audio, in my opinion, is going to do very little to help the Democrats because the Democrats are not offering anything that fundamentally changes the material conditions that Americans are living under, that workers are functioning under. All they're offering is the exact same thing that we got in 2016. Trump bad. Hillary good. Hillary nice. She go high. It's just not a smart strategy, number one. And number two, you should care about saving human lives. And Woodward could have done that by releasing this audio earlier so rational people could have done reasonable things to either slow the spread of the virus or prevent themselves from getting sick in the first place. I also want to read a few excerpts from an awesome piece that was written by David Sirota in Jacobin. So he writes, the tape of Trump admitting coronavirus was deadly and airborne was recorded in early February when there was very little public awareness in the United States of just how lethal the disease is. In fact, 2 days before Trump made his comments to Woodward, the Washington Post published a story about lawmakers on Capitol Hill pushing the White House to take the pandemic more seriously. Now that's relevant. It's incredibly relevant because Bob Woodward attempted to defend himself. And he argued, well, I didn't know if Trump was lying to me. Well, you're a legendary journalist. You're a legendary investigative reporter. Why didn't you investigate it? Why didn't you look into what Capitol Hill was attempting to pressure Trump to do? I'm just not buying that argument. Sirota further writes, you can easily imagine a Bob Woodward bombshell story in the same Washington Post 2 days later, revealing that contrary to his public statements, the president acknowledged that the situation is dire. Sirota further writes, you can then imagine that such a revelation might embolden the Democratic lawmakers demanding more aggressive action, and that might have led to tens of thousands fewer casualties. And by Woodward's own account, he was free to publish such story. He didn't have some prearranged agreement with Trump to hold publication. You know, some of the people who were trying to defend Woodward were like, well, I don't know, maybe there was some sort of embargo on these interviews, and maybe that's the reason why he didn't do it. He didn't even have that type of contract. He was free to release this audio whenever he pleased. But again, he chose not to because he wanted to do so closer to the release of his upcoming book, to promote it, to sell as many books as possible. That's what this was about. And I do want to read some of these defenses of Woodward. One person writes on Twitter, I was angry at Woodward at first also. Then I thought about it and realized that if he had told us back then, we all would have just forgotten about it like everything else Trump does. Maybe this way it'll actually have some effect on the election. No, maybe if he had actually released it earlier, people would have done what it took to keep themselves safe from the virus. How about that? Maybe that's a little more important. It's not just about the election. It's about doing what's in the best interests of the American people, something that Woodward was unwilling to do when he weighed the options of doing the right thing or making more money and selling more books. Sirota clearly explains the role of what a journalist should be, and I think many journalists have actually forgotten about this. He writes, the journalist's job is to contemporaneously report vital information so that the public is informed. That's why a free press is so critical to a democracy. It is supposed to provide a check on the government. And I absolutely agree with him. And look, one other point that David Sirota makes that I didn't see coming, but he's absolutely right about it. The fact that Woodward decided to sit on this audio is now being weaponized by Trump. Trump is using it as a shield. And so Trump downplayed his own disgusting, vicious, cruel behavior by saying, Bob Woodward had my quotes for many months. If he thought they were so bad or dangerous, why didn't he immediately report them in an effort to save lives? Didn't he have an obligation to do so? No, because he knew they were good and proper answers. Calm, no panic. Now, what Trump is saying there on its face is true. It's right. And that's why I hate it so much. When people give Trump the ability to take the moral high ground, that's when we lose. And so Woodward was willing to do that, again, in order to promote his book. And that's pretty devastating. Doesn't take away from the great work he did in the past. People make mistakes, there's no question about it. But we need to stop thinking about things in a black and white way, in an unnuanced way, where someone is either 100% good, they've never made any mistakes, or 100% bad, they only make mistakes. People don't work that way. People do have their self-interests in mind, and I think the decision that Bob Woodward made in this particular case demonstrates that. And we need to be able to critique one another openly, honestly, so we can learn from those mistakes and not repeat the mistakes from history. All right, Nando. I'm sorry, I went on very long with that.
Not at all. No, it was great. I mean, this is, to me, it's an open and shut case. I cannot even believe that there's a debate around it. And there's the sort of defenses that I see. One of them is like a fully black-pilled kind of defense, which is like, it wouldn't have made a difference. It wouldn't have mattered. In that case, like, why does anyone work in the media? Like, if none of it matters, then Bob Woodward shouldn't even be reporting in the first place, and blah, blah, blah. So you have to reject that outright, because it negates the entire premise of Bob Woodward even doing this reporting in the first place. But second of all, I think it would have mattered for two reasons. The first is that there's tape. Like, if this was just Bob Woodward sitting down with Trump and then writing down what they discussed, it wouldn't be the same as like releasing actual audio of it. And second of all, it's the timing of it, that it happened when people were generally, even people like us, were like, I don't know, is this like a real thing or not? That would have, had it come out after the coronavirus became like enmeshed within the culture war, of liberals versus conservatives and all that stuff, then it would have mattered less. But if it came out before all that craziness, you can imagine governors, first of all, you can imagine Republican governors having more political cover to do something about the coronavirus, because often they do it, their response was clearly just like meant to not upset Trump, but like this might have given them some political cover. And it also like would have probably influenced some Democratic governors. I mean, the 6 days between the California lockdown and the New York lockdown, there was a 6-day gap there. That likely caused the deaths of thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in New York. This might have changed that, like literally, like you can imagine like, okay, well, the Democrats would be like, okay, well, if the president is getting like these kind of inside briefings that this thing is much more serious, even though we don't trust him or believe, you know what I mean? Like, just this tape, it's very jarring. He's very frank, and it's very obvious that it's like what he really believes. And it's just like this, and
so detailed.
It's so detailed. Like, he's clearly getting the information, and it's just, everything about. I mean, remember the whole Kelly Loeffler thing where she was trading stock on the information while publicly denying it. It's just it's an absolute heinous dereliction of journalistic duty. From Bob Woodward. It's one of the worst I can remember, really. It's one of like the worst breaches of journalistic ethics that I can remember in my lifetime, easily. I mean, this is like on par with the New York Times delaying the reporting on the illegal surveillance, the Bush administration's illegal surveillance till after the election. Like, it's like on that same plane. So
it drives me crazy. And the only thing that makes me more furious at the decision that Woodward made is just the defense that we keep hearing over and over again from Democrats, right? Like defending him because they're like, no, it's better because this is closer to the election. It might actually hurt Trump. No, it's not. But it's so indicative of what the Democratic Party has become, right? All of their eggs are in this "we got to beat Trump" basket. And they're completely ignoring the value of human lives. Like, it blows my mind.
It's insane.
And Nando, my mind keeps going back to, I went on a family cruise.
I know.
In Florida in late February.
Yeah.
I was on a
you might have
cruise,
not
guys.
Gone.
You think I would have had the perfect excuse. I'm just kidding. It was great. It was a fun cruise. And luckily we didn't get sick. No, but you and I hosted the very last in-studio show for TYT. Yeah. I believe it was like March 18th or March 17th.
Yeah.
None of us were wearing masks.
Later.
None of us really.
No.
It's just crazy. The whole thing is crazy. And we really need to get our mind right because first off, if you really do want to beat Trump, you have to acknowledge that this strategy used by corporate Democrats is a very risky strategy because you've got to give people something to vote for. And scandals just, they call him Teflon Don for a reason. Just don't stick with Trump. So what are you going to do to inspire voters? And if the answer is nothing will fundamentally change, well, you're taking a huge risk. Yeah. And human lives are being lost in the process. Anyway.
Yeah.